Good afternoon. My name is John Blair, and today we've got a lecture in the World War I series sponsored by the Bryan College Station Library System. And today we're going to be talking about military service in the Great War, 1914 to 1920. How to research and write about your World War I veteran. I wanted to specifically point out that we are talking about military service, even though your World War I, there's a lot of folks that we found out through our work with the World War I Centennial Committee that are World War I veterans in a different way, in a different sense. So a lot of people experienced the war on the home front. A lot of people experienced the war here at Texas A&M at the university, teaching classes, working actually for the War Department. But we're going to concentrate today specifically on military service. And the other thing I wanted to point out are these dates, 1914 to 1920. Everybody knows, or we should know, be aware that the United States entered World War I April 6, 1917. So why do we have 1914 up there? When you're researching your veteran, there is a possibility that individual may have gone overseas prior to the United States entry into the war. We found out in researching a lot of our Texas Aggie veterans that a lot of them went to Canada. And they didn't go to Canada for the same reason that folks during Vietnam went to Canada. They actually went to Canada to join the Canadian forces so they could fight with the British in France. So we have some went to France, some went to Britain, and some went to Canada. So don't rule out that if somebody disappears in your family tree for a few years during this time, they may actually be in Europe before the war started. So first thing, we're looking at service records, we're looking at federal service, so automatically we think of the National Archives and Records Administration. They have two facilities. One is the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, and the other one is Archives 2 in College Park, Maryland, which would hold the records primarily, for the most part, I guess you could say, anything after 1900 is usually at College Park. And you can kind of use that as a rule of thumb. So if you wanted to do military veteran, I want a service record, I'll just write up there and they'll send it to me and I'll have all the information that I need. Unfortunately, that's not true. And one of the things that I want to talk about today, or the whole topic of talking about this today, is to give you an opportunity to see 1973, the National Personnel Records Center caught fire. The 6th floor, which is here, this is the roof of the building. Again, it's an old structure, caved in. You've got these shelving units here that held records. You've got a lot of records here on the floor and the debris. Again, it's shelving units with records on it, getting pulled out from the fire, and some filing cabinets that have melted, and so there was quite a bit of loss. How bad was the loss? If talking about World War I, there were over 5 million records stored on the 6th floor. Only about 1 million of those were recovered. So you're looking at about 80% of the Army records for World War I were destroyed. But the good news is there's still 1 million of them there. So we have to take the good with the bad. This is what the records look like, the ones that were recovered, that 1 million. So we do have some. So if you write the National Archives, they'll have to run a check to see the recovered records and to see what they have. This is what it looks like when they pull it out, and that's what it looks like when it gets treated. So they've got a good staff of folks up there. They've got a wonderful brand new facility, state-of-the-art equipment, but you can see from moving from that blob to that, it takes a long time and a lot of work. So that is something to remember. The one thing I did want to point out, because this is very, very important, this is Army records. Now we all know also again that the Army Air Corps of World War II, the Air Force really wasn't created until 1947. So all of the Air Service records are in with the Army records, but we've got a little surprise here. The Marine Corps only had 300 records on the 6th floor, and they lost half of them. But there were a lot more than 300 Marines fighting in World War I, and the Navy the same thing, 2,300, and they lost about half of them. So if you happen to have a World War I ancestor that fought in the Marine Corps or served in the Marine Corps or the Navy, there's a good chance you'll have a record. And so when you request that record, this is some of what you would get. This is my grandmother's youngest brother, James Frederick Griffith. This is his enlistment paperwork. I find it interesting that he was 20 pounds underweight and had to be waived by the Commandant of the Marine Corps to actually get into the Marine Corps. And then you have a service jacket, very similar. This is an enlarged version here, and I'm going to pass this around. This is what it'll look like. And so every page has something on it. As you go through his file, if some folks want to look at that, I'll pass that around. This is his professional and conduct record. It gives you every base, every location, and the time period where he was there. And one of the bonuses of his record is a photograph taken in uniform prior to this time, especially if you've had any experience with Civil War records. They had what they call descriptive rolls. For a descriptive roll, you'll have a person, they'll have their skin color, the color of their hair, the color of eyes, they'll have their height. I don't think they had the weight, but they may have had the weight on some of them as they developed that system. So photography was available, and so they started taking photographs of these young men and women in the military. Now, the one thing that I do want to share, he joined in 1916. He joined the Marine Corps in 1916, not 1917 when the war broke out. If we think back on American history, what was going on in 1916, and we look south, especially to Mexico, we know that the revolution is going on. We know Pancho Villa is making excursions into New Mexico. And so Fred decided to join the Marine Corps to defend the state of Texas, more or less. So he got in a year early, and he got his picture taken. From my research experience at the at St. Louis, most of the individuals who were drafted or who enlisted in 1917 do not have a picture in their service record. I believe that was because of the amount of volume of people coming through, and they just simply didn't have the time to do that. So that's an enlisted record. The officers have something very, very similar. This is a gentleman by the name of John Thaddeus Walker. He's a class of 1917 at Texas A&M. And it basically reads like a resume of everything that he did. And it's 11 pages. And of course, he remained in the Marine Corps for a period of time. And there are several photographs in his jacket. One is a major in 1935, lieutenant colonel, and then a major general in 49. So as a genealogist, you really, this is really fantastic stuff to have, of period photos that sometimes may be lost or the family never even had. And just as a comparison, that's John Walker in the yearbook from A&M in 1917 when he had, yeah, I don't know where he lost his hair, somewhere along the way, but yeah, so probably wearing the helmet in the trenches. So that's the Marine Corps records. Navy, very similar. Again, this is a little service record file. Fingerprints, got all of those, and then basic genealogical information here, where he's born, where and date. You'll see up here, this is Jessie Easterwood, the namesake of our local airport. And when I went to St. Louis to do the research and to pull a lot of these records for the World War I committee, I had about 46 records in 3 days. And so when they brought the records, I photographed everything as quickly as I could. They brought me Easterwood's record. I photographed it. Everything was good. I went home. I was happy. And then I realized that something's wrong. We know that Easterwood was killed in the Canal Zone in an airplane crash in 1919 as a lieutenant in the Navy. But this record ends in 1917. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, here's one of the things that you need to be aware of, and don't make this mistake that I did. He has two. He has two service records. He has one as an enlisted man and he has another one as an officer. So if you have someone that is in that situation, make sure that you get both records when you go or when you request information from St. Louis. Okay? You need to make sure that they know that to look for the other one. And a lot of times, we'll hold that question for me, and we'll get to another point here. Let me. Okay, so Navy, Marine Corps, pretty good chance you've got a record in St. Louis. Army, not so much. So what do you do if you can't find an Army record or it's not one of the ones that recovered? The 80% of the Army World War I records that were destroyed in that fire. Well, we're going to look at some other things. How do you get information? Well, anybody who's served in the military knows that they document everything. And so if you spend time in the military, they document everything. If you get out of the military, they want to document everything. So there's a lot of information available. So as a veteran, you qualify for a headstone, and you can apply for that. And so there's a process of applying for the headstone. These forms are actually available on Ancestry. I think they go up to about 1962. And what you'll see here is you'll see a lot of red marking. I don't know if that comes through in the screen. But the red is all the corrections that the War Department did on the original application that in this situation was typed. Okay? The other one is, this is a request to be interred in Arlington National Cemetery. There's a lot of national cemeteries spread around the United States, and so in order to be buried there, you have to apply. And the same thing happens because they're filling in all this information that they have on file for it to be there. Both of these are on Ancestry. The other thing that's on Ancestry is this Burrell's death file, which is a beneficiary identification records locator subsystem. Burrell's, again, talking about acronyms, military, very, very familiar. And it will give you the dates of service. That's basically all it will give you, but at least it will give you that. Some other things that you can have the National Archives look for, and this is one of the things I want to communicate. When you ask for that record, you really need to ask for other things as well so they know that that's what you're looking for. Just so everybody is aware, there's a lot of information being requested. They have limited staffing, limited time. So I'll give you an experience that I had. I requested my great-grandfather's Civil War service record, and his name is John Lockhart, Lockhart. I got a letter back from the National Archives said, no record available. I did some more research, and I found his name listed as John Lockhart, Lockhart. The National Archives is not staffed to conduct research, so if you don't have the spelling correct, 100%, they're going to get a letter back saying it's not available. So just be aware of that. And so this is what we're asking for. So this is a pay record. This is actually George Bush's father's pay record from World War I. We were trying to verify that when he went to Europe and how much time he was there. And sure enough, on this pay record, very similar to that professional conduct record that we showed earlier, it has AEF, which stands for American Expeditionary Force here, and has the date, so we actually do know. At Archives 2, I mentioned that earlier, this is the return of the headquarters Field Artillery Brigade that Prescott Bush was in, and sure enough, there he is here, and it talks about him being transferred out of the battery and onto the brigade staff, and then wonderful, wonderful information down here on the record of events where it talks what this unit, or records what this unit did when they left Camp Sherman, Ohio, on June 2nd of 1918. They traveled by rail, shipped to Southampton, England, then over to France. So a lot of information that you can use to learn about your World War I ancestors' service. This is probably one of the most fascinating, I think, items that I learned about. This file is one person's Veterans Administration file. So if you have a family member and you get a copy of a death record and that death certificate says that he died in the VA hospital in Marlin or the VA hospital in Temple or the VA hospital anywhere it might be, then there is a good chance that he may have a Veterans Administration file. And so this is one man's file. And we want to talk about him today. This is John Fushak. He grew up, born and raised here in Brazos County. He was a first-generation American. Company G36, 360th Infantry. We're all familiar with PTSD today. Back in World War I, they referred to it as shell shock. And John, his VA file has an amazing amount of information about his life, and I thought I would share some of it and really get us to think about some of the things that we are fortunate enough. He went to school at age 7 and he left at 18, but he only completed the 4th grade. He didn't do any drugs, but he did smoke and chew tobacco. He really couldn't. He wasn't ignorant. He couldn't see. It goes to record. He couldn't see well. He needed eyeglasses and could not get them because of lack of funds. So after school, when he left school, he basically worked odd jobs, fixing fences, wagon wheels, doing a little dairy work. And by the time he enlisted in the Army, he had accumulated $30 and a horse. And that's all that man owned. And so he joined the Army. He actually, it says, it records in here, he actually liked military service. Well, I think we can see here for the first time he has a pair of glasses on. And so he also probably had enough to eat. He probably had clothing. He had a place to stay. And I think he felt like he belonged. But unfortunately, during the war, towards the end, he was admitted to Sam Houston at the base hospital. And the report in the neuropsychiatric examination reported that he thought he had been sent to France so he could raise pigeons and send messages to God. And then later, he came under another evaluation where he heard people asking him to have a cigarette to go with them to eat. He hears these people sing and whistle, has shaken hands with and talked with dead men. He sees dead men come to his bed and they try to kiss him. So John went into a hospital almost immediately, 1918, and he really stayed there until his death, until 1941. So it was a very tragic life. As a genealogist, I think some people say, well, this is tough. It is tough. But you have a sense of this man's life. You have a sense of how lucky you are. And you also understand the ramifications, the potential ramifications of going to war. The other thing that the VA file has is correspondence. There is a letter from his sister that I wanted to read quickly here. And the family was so, and this is really pulls at your heart, that the family really were ready to try anything to bring him back. And so this is actually a response from the VA she wrote, the VA wrote back, and then this is the third in that series. And she says, "Dear sir, you didn't understand. I didn't mean for you to anoint and pray for John F. I know you cannot do it. I just asked if you would help us a little while I would pray for Fushak here. The gospel healer prayed for him, and he needs someone to pray and praise God for him while he isn't able. So I just wanted you to put a handkerchief on Fushak. I got the handkerchief that the gospel healer anointed and prayed over it to be put to affected parts while you do it in person. But you got to pray and praise God and believe it. But I didn't send it as you do not believe it and cannot pray. It's different with me. I believe that as Reverend R.P. Ritchie prayed for my blind eyes first in April 1925, and my eyes are healed. I know you cannot believe things like this because you haven't heard anything like it before. I'm sending you a paper that I want you to read so that God healed the shell-shocked boy that was worth in Fushak, and I know God will heal John too. Listen, I'm sending envelope and stamps for you to be so kind and send me the paper back about the shell-shocked boy. I want to share it to someone else and also to his family. How is John, please? We can do so little when he needs so much. If there are any sick in your family, just write to Reverend R.T. Rickian that will pray for you and God will heal, but person got to trust and praise God. May God bless you. She really, really wanted her brother to come back, and she was trying desperately anything. And so as sad and emotional as that record is, it has everything about what occurred in his life following the war. So once you move past the federal records, you're now into state government files, historical societies, and you're also looking at online databases. One word of caution on the online databases: make sure that you do not take transcriptions at face value. The ones that have the forms, an image of the form or the record itself is really what you should be looking for. This is one of the guides that I was able to find online. It's actually very, very nice, and it tells you what's available, gives you a good summary by state. And it's all in alphabetical order, and so you can see military card files, and it tells you where it's at. It's at Ancestry, it's at Ancestry, it's at Family Search. So you can actually go to those websites, and you know it's already there before you start looking. Okay, service statement cards. These are absolutely the gold mine of Army World War I records. They were started during the war. The War Department started getting tons and tons of correspondence asking for information on casualties. And so they had a casualty card file. Again, we all know that we're in the age, but way before computers. So they had these little cards on all these men that had been casualties in the war. And so that's how this started. After the United States decided, the federal government decided, instead of answering all of these inquiries that people were writing in, they were just simply going to make a card for every soldier, no matter what the branch of service, and send it to the state. So the state can handle those inquiries, and the federal government would basically step out of that process. So what they did was give us the best source of information for individuals in the Army in World War I. And Pam, you asked about how do you know if there's two records. These will tell you, because when you start looking for these statement of service cards, you'll have one that will be enlisted, and then you'll have another one that will be an officer. And so there'll be two different cards, and you can tell what's going on. And I'm trying to think if this one, yes. Okay, so this is Richard J. Dunn, band leader, July 1st, 1916. Again, he joined in 1914. Anybody knows Richard J. Dunn? He wrote the music to Spirit of Aggieland. He's a band leader here for many, many years at Texas A&M. And so you'll see here, Pam, where it says enlisted RA means regular Army at Texas City, Texas. But then down here at the bottom, it says honorably discharged to accept commission. So he should have two files. But he's Army, so more than likely, you know, he may be in that 80% that were destroyed, yes. And then also over here, we have Julian Wright, who was one of the assistants to the commandant at A&M in the 1920s. These, what you need to know about the statement service cards, they will be where they were living. So Richard A. Dunn was actually born in Massachusetts. He was enlisted in Texas, but he was living in Pennsylvania. So Pennsylvania is who has his card. And the same thing with Julian Wright, New York, okay? So when you're looking for that state card, he said, well, I know he was living in Texas, or I know he was born in Texas. It doesn't matter. Where was he at when they did the card? So that may take a little bit to try to find those. So here's a couple of samples. Here's another one that has a ton of information on it. This is, again, class of 1917, Durant Samuel Buchanan. I think he remained in the Marine Corps up to Brigadier General, another World War I, World War II veteran. And it has everything that he did for the most part, all the engagements. And then you start to read, just like we read Fushak's file, you're starting to read some of the things that happened to him, and really gives you, I believe, a strong appreciation for what these men did during this time. He was shot and gassed on the 16th, June 16, 1918, and then he was a gunshot wound in his left eye and both eyes in October 4th, 1918. And during that engagement in October, he was at St. Etienne, where he remained at his post of command in spite of his wounds and assisted in reorganizing his company. So he was pretty well shot up, but he stayed and did his job, and just really tough guy. And he's also here at Belleau Wood, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. So there are two sides to the card. Sometimes it'll say over. Sometimes it'll just go here and it just kind of drops off. Make sure you go and take a look at that back side of the card. Sometimes the states don't have the cards. I think they just decided to publish that information and they got rid of the cards. So we have that situation for Ohio. You can see it's kind of the same stuff. This guy's National Guard, Delaware, Ohio, when he enlisted. He was born in Georgetown, Ohio, and gives his age. Connecticut did the same thing, 1917, 1920. So sometimes you'll find them, the cards in a published format. Other state records that are available, Kansas published their casualties. Casualties only, but still good information and in a published form. And then Pennsylvania has a veterans compensation application. And again, it gets a little confusing because he's living in the state of Texas in the county of Brazos. But he basically went into the service in Pennsylvania. So he had to go back to the state of Pennsylvania to apply for his veterans compensation. A lot of states actually gave pensions to World War I veterans. Some states did, others did not. So there are, check and see if that's one of them. I don't have a list of that. Now we're going to look at some other things that are a little kind of a little more detail. This is the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College library, digital library, and they have one of the things that they do, well, they prepare papers based on events, military activities and things of that nature. And this is a whole military history section here, 1900 to 1939, and so you can go online and find, using those cards, what are some of the engagements? What are some of the things that are happening? What to give you some more information? This is a really a valuable tool as well. The National Archives, that's the web address. It's catalog.archives.gov. It is a photo collection. It actually has a lot of things on there, but I want to point out that when you look for the photographs, this is what you'll get if you can do a good search with some positive information on it to give you the right thing. So when we, on the Centennial Committee, we type in Agricultural Mechanical College of Texas or Agricultural Mechanical in Texas, we'll get information of the training camp, we'll get information about what was going on at Texas A&M on the campus, and so you'll see here, this is the YMCA building in the background. These are young men out here doing push-ups, although it actually says getting vigorous setting up exercises. So maybe they called it something different, but it looks like these guys are doing push-ups to me. And then we have a gentleman right here that's in a British pith helmet. He's actually a Canadian officer that was sent to A&M to help train some of the cadets. So if you want to do, add some photographs to your family history to understand what they were seeing, your ancestors were seeing, you can go to this. There's some period photos, but one word of caution. I mentioned Belleau Wood earlier. Belleau Wood is in this digital collection two different ways. Be very careful. You can look it up in English, but if it is somewhere in a different country, it may have the French word as well. So Belleau Wood will be in as Belleau Wood and also be in there as Beau de Belleau, okay? So be careful or think about that, just think about it. Understand that the different language may be, it may be recorded as such. Last one of the other things. Your own family, I think, is also a good source. A lot of people say, well, I don't have anything, but and all my cousins don't have anything, but what about second cousins? What about third cousins? You may have to do a little bit of digging in your own family. Just a story, we had a lady at work whose uncle, her dad's older brother, died during World War I, and he has the little porcelain photograph on his headstone in the cemetery. And that's the only photograph she's ever seen. And when we started this project, I asked her, I said, you know, that's all I've never seen? And we actually found her, she never knew anything about a service, so we found the statement of service card on him and found out what happened. He had died of pneumonia at Fort Dix, so he's a victim of the so-called Spanish flu. But she started checking around in her family. And sure enough, one of her cousins had a full-length photograph of him, and the face on that photograph is the one that is on the tombstone out at the cemetery. There's also sometimes people will write information down. This, we got a copy of this from a gentleman here in Brazos County, Joe Mirka. His is his dad. It's a photograph that he had, and his dad actually wrote about his experiences during the war, and we were able to get a copy of that. And then we were also able to ask him to bring in a few things. So this is Joe Mirka Sr., and this is Joe Mirka Jr. This is one of the projects that the World War I Centennial Committee is doing, called the Living Legacy exhibit that we'll be hosting this Veterans Day in the Carnegie Library, where we have the descendants of the veterans holding a picture of their veteran. He's got his dad's dog tag. We'll come back to that here in a minute. This is a Madonna and Child. Mirkas were Catholic, and his dad carried that. Joe Jr. carried it in Korea, and his nephew carried it in Vietnam. So it's been around, this has been around the world. And then, of course, this is the Victory Medal that the veterans were awarded. This right here is the bullet that his father pulled out of his arm. The second time he went over the top, he got shot in the arm. It didn't hit a bone or any muscle, but it basically just kind of grazed him, I think. And he had the point of, the story goes, he had the point of the bullet. He could see that. He pulled his wire cutters out, pulled the bullet out, went to the aid station, and his son told me, yeah, Dad had that on his watch chain his whole life. So I guess it was his lucky charm. So, and these are some of the fascinating stories that we get when we're talking to folks. Something else just on family records. This is in my collection. Again, I have this. This is a postcard. Just says First Company on here. It doesn't really, you know, it looks like World War I because of the hats that they're wearing here. You can't really pick up a whole lot of other detail. There's some kind of a castle here in the background, looks like. So I'm thinking, well, this must be in Europe because that's where castles are, right? And this came out of my grandmother, so it's the Griffiths. And my grandmother had two brothers in the service. One was in the Army, an older brother, and her younger brother was in the Marine Corps. And on the back of this says, must be Roy. Well, Roy was the one in the Army, the older brother. And I started doing some checking, and I'm like, I don't know how this could be Roy. And sure enough, I decided that that was incorrect, that this is actually Fred. These are actually Marines. Because what I found out is when I started taking a look at this, it's still there today. So he spent his time in World War I, not in France. And here's another, you know, let's broaden our mind about World War I. He spent his time in the Marine Corps during World War I on the island of Santo Domingo. So he was in the Dominican Republic. And this is the little castle. This is looking, you know, we're standing up here taking this photograph down. This is an old magazine, and from the picture, there's the magazine, the roof of the old magazine building. And so I'm thinking Fred was kneeling maybe about right here. So you can actually go and see, you know, you go to battlefields, people visit battlefields, but you can also go to other things. This is actually an old Spanish fort. I don't know if you can see very well, but the ships would sail up in here to the docks, and so this basically guarded the entrance of that entry. Real quick, unit history, publications, and biographies. I brought a couple of them with me here. And so you can find these, and I actually, my wife she tries to keep me out of trouble. But I go on eBay every once in a while. I pick up things that kind of interest me, and I try to stay out of trouble, but sometimes it doesn't work. This is the history of the 2nd U.S. Engineers. It was a period written in 1919. It is actually an Aggie who served during the First World War, wrote that. This is the history of Camp Travis in Texas in 1918. This is actually a pretty interesting book. It has a lot of unit photographs of it. And also, I would say that folks need to understand, again, the time period, the context of the period. So yes, the troops are segregated in this book, and there are some cartoons in here that today would be rendered inappropriate, but again, it's the context of the period. So you got unit photos, but there's also books. This one I picked up from a secondhand bookseller, and this is the 360th Infantry, the unit that Fushak was in, and it actually has individual photographs of the soldiers. And so these, yes, they are small, but you can scan them. You can get them to make them look a little bit, blow them up or whatever, and see some detail on them. The officers, of course, have bigger pictures, and so there's actually, I think one of these gentlemen in here is a Distinguished Service Cross winner from Texas A&M as well. So we've got some of that. So even if you don't have a service record with a photograph in it, that unit may have published something during the war or even after the war that may have that photograph. And again, also, I'm going to go ahead and bring this in. My Aussie relatives, this is with the 22nd. This is actually a history of an Australian unit. So again, they're from a complete international collection of information out there. If you don't want to get in trouble with your spouse and buy stuff online from eBay, there is a site that you can go to, and it's called HathiTrust. It's part of the New York Public Library system, and it's a digital library. It's absolutely fantastic. Go onto the site, play around with it, put in some search terms. A&M published what they call a gold book. All the Aggies who died and they knew about at the time, they published a little book, and it's actually in HathiTrust. And you can pull it up and you can see and read about all the Ags that they knew about then. Since then, we've found six more. Last but not least, there's no sense in doing all this research, being all this interested. This is great stuff. I love it. Well, my kids aren't interested in it, so, I guess it goes with me. There's no sense in doing all this research if you don't pull it together and write about it. And so just a few things here. Try to outline. I don't outline very well, but if you need to outline. Include the photographs. Everybody likes pictures. I mean, everybody does. And so you may not have a picture of your veteran, but you may have pictures of places. You may have pictures of the commanding officer. You may have pictures of terrain. You may have pictures of the actual document. Put that in your writing. If he's got an enlistment form, put that in there. He says he's 20 pounds underweight. That's good information. Artifacts. If you have a picture of a bullet that somebody pulled out of their arm, put that in your writing. Make sure that when you do something from a unit history book or a diary or whatever, put quotes around it and make sure that you source that. This is where I got this information. This is who said this. And this is one of the things I hear all the time. Well, I can't write, I can't do this and that. Do the best you can. Do the best you can. I mean, that's all you can do. And so it's better than nothing. And ask somebody else to read it. And if you're a little awkward in some of your sentences, they may give you some suggestions and do what you want to do. And then publish it. But Do include citations on everything, please. Please do include citations. This is one of my earlier attempts. You can see that I violated some of my own rules because I don't have any pictures other than the individual that I have. And this is one of my Australian relatives that was in World War I, but I do have a picture of him in his uniform. You can see I've got some quotations from the history books. I do have the citations down here, the title, page numbers, and things of that nature. And so this is really my first attempt at trying to describe what his experience was in World War I. And it doesn't have to be any length. I mean, this is only 3 pages. I think the total was 4. And that's the other thing when people are writing about family history. How do you tie all this again? How do I tie in grandmother and father and sister and all of that? Well, just pick a segment of their life and write about it. And so World War I actually gives you an opportunity. It gives you something, an event, and how they participated in that event. And then you can just write about that story. And so you have a group of stories. And I think, yeah, just that, and that should be it. Any questions? Oh, I got a question. Yes.
The service statement cards were actually done when? When were they made?
They started during the war as casualty cards, and then from that they grew to having all the service cards. So they actually did it at the end of the war, but as with so many things that occur in the United States government, they didn't get enough funding. And so it wasn't until, I believe, the 20s that they finally finished that. So it is more of a contemporary, or not contemporary, but a period time.
So everything that person did in World War I should be on that card, though?
Absolutely, yes. Everything should be.
Is that what Mabry says that they have?
That's exactly what Mabry has. But so the service cards, and I have a piece here. So Camp Mabry actually has the cards, but you can go to Family Search because Family Search, LDS have gone and scanned them all. So on Family Search, you can go, Texas has their cards. They also have North Carolina and Louisiana. So completely free, no subscription. You just sign up, give a password, and you can look up those 3 states. Ancestry has Ohio soldiers in World War I, Pennsylvania, Georgia, New York, and Alabama are all on Ancestry.com. And so if you have a subscription to Ancestry.com, you have access. And if you don't, then any facility operated by the National Archives, you should be able to go in, and they'll have a public access computer that has access to Ancestry free of charge. And you just have to go in and abide by their policies and procedures, and you should be able to access that. Okay? No further questions? Thank you very much.